There's a lot of interesting parallels between the martial arts and the world of ideas. History is very fascinating. So I'm going to tell an abbreviated story. Prior to, I think it was like the mid 20th century, you had the development of 1,000 different schools of martial thought, technique, and skill. You could broadly categorize them as striking arts. You could think of like boxing as being a striking art, kickboxing, and grappling arts like wrestling, jiu-jitsu, that type of thing. Okay. What happened martial arts has been practiced for thousands of years, but there did not seem to be a platform up until fairly recently for excellent students of different disciplines to fight each other. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, you had the jiu-jitsu practitioners and the judo practitioners were slightly different rules. You have in the strikers, you have Western boxing, which is hands only, versus kickboxing, which allows kicks, versus Muay Thai, which allows kicks to the legs. Different rule systems. So what you had was absolute masters in their own disciplines who had a bunch of students that said, our Tai Chi guy, or maybe not Tai Chi, that might be an exception, but our kickboxing guy is phenomenal. He can knock anybody out, an exceptional martial artist. Everybody would rave about him. He's been a 8th degree black belt for 30 years. Then what started to happen in the middle of the 20th century is there was a family called the Gracies in Brazil that would conduct vale tudo fights, which is no holds barred. They thought they had developed the ultimate martial style. And they said, listen, I don't care how big you are, how long you've been training, where you are in the world, you come to Brazil and we'll fight you, no holds barred, and we'll see who wins. It was both an excellent methodology for getting closer to the martial truth and a great marketing tactic, because it's like, hey, what's happening here? So the abbreviated version is this is called Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, announced as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, was totally revolutionary and dominated a bunch of traditional martial arts that had the super strong bodybuilders that could knock anybody out. It turns out that grappling skill in a real vale tudo context is way more important than striking skill. So even if you are exceptionally gifted within the rules and domains of kickboxing, it doesn't even translate almost at all sometimes to genuine martial skill. Okay, so this is, by the way, this is the origins of the UFC. I don't know if you're familiar in MMA. There's this organization called the UFC. This had their origins from the Gracie family because they said, we want to have mixed martial arts competition to demonstrate the superiority of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. Interesting historical tidbit. Okay. One cool anecdote here, talking about kickboxing. I highly recommend anybody watch this video if you're interested in like psychology of when an expert discovers that he is not as skilled as he thought he was. There was a guy called Rick Rufus, who was a kickboxer, I want to say in the 1980s, like absolutely phenomenal kickboxing talent. He was invited to participate in a striking match with a Muay Thai guy, which it was no grappling, but Muay Thai allows leg kicks, and American kickboxing, which Rick Rufus came from, did not allow leg kicks. So what happened? Well, at the beginning of the fight, Rick looks impressive. He's like doing all these, fancy moves. He rocks the guy. Okay. And then the Muay Thai practitioner discovers he has a technique that the other guy is totally unfamiliar with, which is the leg kick. And so what does he do? He keeps kicking the leg. He keeps kicking the leg. And then the guy can't walk. And eventually Rick Rufus loses the fight because he was, despite being a master, an international prize fighter, he had no experience with this technique. And so interesting. I bring this up to say he's interviewed about this. And what would you expect he says? He goes, well, kicking the leg doesn't take any skill. As you would expect, the person was like, okay, well, clearly I built my whole psychology around being the skilled martial artist. Here's a guy who's smaller than me doing this fairly simple technique that I had no ability to counter, and he beat me. That sort of invalidates me. And that implies all of the social hierarchy around my dojo and all of the conferences that I give. I thought I was an expert, but when the rubber meets the road, I guess I'm not as good as I thought. Okay, that to me seems like exactly the circumstance of intellectuals and academics, especially over the course of the 20th century as academia has grown. You have these different disciplines that are hyper-specialized, and you have a bunch of prestige within the discipline and the great teacher that everybody reveres, but it turns out they're not actually conceptually, philosophically, generally skilled. And when they're met with, interdisciplinary criticism, they just don't have the tools available to defend themselves, if you will.
Okay. Now I think I know what happened.
Okay.
And by the way, love the jiu-jitsu analogy. We'll come back to
cool
what that means in a minute here. But here's what I learned from Jerry Coyne and Richard Dawkins, which is the arbitrary reward structure that exists in academia awarded them something which made them feeble in old age. They weren't necessarily feeble. I can't speak to Coyne as well, but I can say Dawkins of 1976 really had what it took to become a great. I truly believe that. But when you become successful in this modality, and that success brings you into a realm where you're dealing with only the cream of the crop, and everybody in the cream of the crop crowd has the same situation, which is, look, if we start throwing punches, that could be bad. So if we agree to kind of pull our punches and be nice to each other, then, we last. And so the point is, I think what really happened to Richard Dawkins is that he escaped the zone of competition that would have kept him sharp. Right. And the thing that did not happen to Dick Alexander was that never happened to him because he collected around him the best students in the department who, they were all young guns who would say whatever they thought needed to be said. There was no, etiquette about not, attacking an idea that Dick had said. Right. So the point is, he stayed sharp because he surrounded himself with people who didn't believe in those games. And I think what I really ran into with Dawkins was that he did not recognize, maybe because I'm not young anymore. I was a young gun when I was young, and now I'm older. But the point is, I still believe that my field is fucked up. I still believe there are big discoveries that are staring us in the face that we are not seeking. And he was not prepared because he was telling himself the story that there was no next generation of really good biologists because we didn't need one. He didn't recognize somebody who knew some things he didn't know, where he should have been fascinated by that. And I was surprised to find that he wasn't.
Okay. This pattern is almost identical to martial arts stuff. Like what you just so people understand, like when you see a pattern that is in wildly different areas, and it's pretty much the same pattern, it's valuable to get a good model of what that pattern looks like. Okay, so this is what happens in this is like a well-known thing in the world of the martial arts. People will get some sort of, they'll get a black belt in karate or something. And then they're curious, they've seen some of this jujitsu stuff. So they go, maybe they practice karate for 8 years, and they go into the jujitsu gym, and they get their butts handed to them by newbies, kids that are smaller than them, that have been training for a year and a half, beat the sophisticated black belt that walks in the door. And then they are presented with the question, do I continue to get my butt handed to me by people that clearly know something I don't? Or do I say, no, it's not for me, and I'm going to stick in my, in the area in which I'm skilled? That is a well-known phenomenon. It happened to Chuck Norris. That's an interesting story. He's like a real martial artist in addition to being an actor, and he was skilled in striking arts. The same thing happened to him, got destroyed by jiu-jitsu, and said, oh, geez, I'm going to stick around these people because they're closer to truth than I was. So I think so you're sort of describing the same phenomenon, that he had success, and then he was presented with a choice. Do I go swim with the sharks again, or do I continue the path without that sharp competition?
Yeah. In fact, it's almost too good, because the belt system is like a multi-tiered tenure system.
Yeah,
the point is, your black belt should be temporary. As long as you stay in, right? As long as you demonstrate that your skill is a match for people at this level, you keep your black belt, but it should degrade. You should go back down.
That's actually a thing. There are some schools where if you tap out somebody of a higher belt, you swap belts.
Oh,
that is a
good
thing.
Sense to me.
Yeah. So actually, this is kind of crazy how well this analogy works. But I'm sure you will not be surprised to hear what happened to Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. Well, it exploded in the 1980s with MMA. It was like everybody's like, oh my gosh, this is obviously closer to truth. Everybody's got to figure out how to use these techniques. So it was a massive vindication for the Gracie family and the Gracie school. But then what happened? Well, they became the experts. They became the guys that had solved. There was no more knowledge to learn in the domain of grappling, even, which is their domain. It's not just martial arts. In grappling in particular, they're like, those leg locks that some of those people were using and catch wrestlers over there, that's cheap stuff. So like there would be techniques that they weren't as good at, like leg locks. They would be caught by the other grapplers and they would then poo-poo those techniques. It's the same story. So they became, I still have an enormous amount of respect for them and everything that they've developed, but some of them have become the experts whose skill level has not improved since the 1980s. They're still doing the same techniques while others have continued to evolve and iterate.
Yeah. Well,
have you heard that story before?
Nah, I don't know that story, but it does not surprise me. I mean,
No, I mean in the abstract. Like, is that not exactly what happens in academia?
It happens in everything, and it's terrifying, right? Like, I fear. How do I will invest anything in making sure that doesn't happen to me? I think I may know now that the solution actually is the equivalent of students, young guns, whatever. Right? You can stave this problem off by making sure that you are in the arms race, that you are not resting on your laurels.